Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I want you to think back to the last really important meeting or maybe a group discussion you were in. Who talked the most? Got a name in mind? Okay, now, who actually made the final decision? I'm willing to bet it's rarely the same person. Today, we're exploring a totally fascinating and honestly game-changing concept, quiet power. We live in this hyper-connected, incredibly noisy era where we're just constantly told to speak up, stand out, and make some noise. But is the loudest person actually the most powerful? Today, we're going to completely flip the script on how we view silence, and we'll break down exactly why the quietest people in the room are very often the ones holding the real authority.
We are practically conditioned from day one to believe that volume equals power, right? That a chaotic megaphone of dominance just means someone is automatically in charge. If someone is steamrolling a conversation and just taking up all the oxygen in the room, we unconsciously assign them leadership. And because of that, we often mistake a calm, meditative silence for weakness. We just assume quiet people are timid, disengaged, or maybe they just have nothing valuable to offer. But the data and the psychology we're unpacking today show us that this couldn't be further from the truth. Silence, when used intentionally, is actually one of the absolute strongest forms of power you can wield. It's literally a completely different language of influence.
So let's dive right into Section 1, the illusion of noise.
See, true power doesn't actually need a megaphone. In fact, people who are genuinely secure in their influence, they just don't feel this frantic need to constantly prove themselves to everyone around them. They possess this sort of internal force field. So while others are exhausted from shouting just to be noticed, jumping through hoops for a tiny sliver of validation, the truly powerful let their grounded presence do the heavy lifting. They operate on a completely different frequency. They let their deliberate actions and their focused mindset speak volumes. When you don't need to dominate the airspace to feel secure, all that external noise is naturally replaced by deep internal certainty.
Which brings us to Section 2, the power of observation.
Picture the dynamics of your typical corporate brainstorm, or even just a social gathering. You've got people who are so busy trying to be heard. They're mentally drafting their next brilliant sentence through a chaotic tangle of noise while the other person is still talking. They aren't listening. Actually, scratch that. They aren't even trying to listen. They're just waiting for their turn to speak. So they're essentially flying blind. Meanwhile, the quiet person is acting like a strategic detective. With a magnifying glass to the situation, they are simply paying attention. They're watching behavior. They're reading those subtle shifts in body language and analyzing the emotional temperature of the room. They are collecting incredibly valuable data while everyone else is just making noise.
And all of that quiet data collection leads directly to the single, absolutely vital concept: awareness. Awareness is the incredibly potent result of observing more than you talk. And in any situation, whether you're negotiating a salary, navigating messy family dynamics, or leading a massive team, awareness is power. The more you sit back and observe, the more you understand the underlying currents that everyone else completely misses. You see the real motivations, you see the unspoken tensions, and you see the actual power structures in the room, simply because you took the time to look.
Moving right along to Section 3, calmness as confidence. So when faced with friction or a really high-pressure situation, a loud reaction is almost always instant. It's driven by anger, impulse, and this knee-jerk defensive need to strike back. It is inherently chaotic. But a quiet response, that is highly strategic. Quiet people don't react instantly to every single provocation thrown their way. Instead, they pause. They literally let the clock tick for a second. They think, and they respond carefully. That deliberate delay, that profound emotional control, creates an undeniable aura of calmness under pressure. And here's the crazy psychological secret. That calmness is almost universally perceived by others as supreme confidence, because frankly, it takes immense confidence to hold your fire. All right, Section 4, the weight of words.
Think about your favorite movie characters for a sec. The ones who say maybe, 2 words the entire film? They're always the most intimidating and intriguing ones, right? It's a fundamental psychological trigger. People who talk less inherently reveal less about themselves. They aren't broadcasting every fleeting thought, random anxiety, or master plan that pops into their head. By holding back information, they naturally create a powerful aura of mystery. And human beings are inherently drawn to mystery. It's literally in our DNA. We become intensely curious about the quiet person because we have to lean in and do the work to figure them out.
They don't speak just to fill silence. Man, take a second with that. How often do we just ramble because a pause in a conversation feels slightly awkward? We totally panic and throw words into the void just to make the quiet go away. Quiet people do not do that. They are perfectly comfortable letting silence do its work. They are comfortable in the space between words. And because they refuse to fill the air with empty chatter, this massive compounding effect kicks in. Their words carry significantly more weight. It's basically the simple economic principle of scarcity applied to human communication. When something is rare, it's highly valued. Because a quiet person's speech is intentional, measured, and rare, the dynamic completely shifts. When they finally do open their mouth to share an insight, boom, the entire room stops and listens. They completely command attention, and they do the whole shebang without ever having to raise their voice a single decibel.
And that leads us to our final core concept, Section 5, True Inner Strength.
Let's be honest, it is genuinely exhausting to run on that hamster wheel of seeking external attention, approval, and constant recognition from peers. It's a super fragile kind of power because it relies entirely on other people continuing to clap for you. If the applause stops, the power vanishes. Instead, quiet people build their power like a solid brick wall around their core. Because they spend significantly more time reflecting, analyzing, and understanding their own minds, they build unshakable internal strength. They're deeply comfortable in their own skin. They derive their validation internally, meaning their power can't simply be wiped out by a random change in the room's mood.
Okay, let's rapidly pull this all together so you can see the full anatomy of this concept. Look at these pillars of silent power. When you combine deep awareness of your surroundings, complete emotional control under immense pressure, the profound insights born from deep thinking, the magnetic pull of mystery, and the ultimate armor of self-validation, you get a massive compounding effect. This is silent power. It's not passive, no way. It's an undeniable, active, quiet force that completely outclasses sheer volume every single time. I want to speak directly to you for a second here. If you are naturally a quiet person, you have got to stop thinking of it as a weakness. Society might loudly tell you to speak up, to be more aggressive, to force yourself into the spotlight. But the ability to stay calm, to be deeply observant, and to maintain ironclad control of your internal world is incredibly rare. Your silence is not some empty drum waiting to be banged on. It is a highly tuned instrument. Use it intentionally.
Which leaves us with this final, pretty provocative thought. In a noisy world, who is actually in control? Is it the person frantically trying to dictate the volume, constantly fighting, just to be heard over the static? Or is it the person silently observing, understanding the currents, and calmly navigating the chaos? Take this insight with you. Take a look around your own life, and watch how the quietest people in the room are very often the most powerful. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.